Today's talk is about how will leaders mentally thrive in the next 10 years. A discussion focusing on human-centric growth in the face of global change. How to mentally thrive in the next 10 years is a question I've been asking myself consistently since 2016, when I first launched my mental health technology platform with the aim to digitalize cognitive behavioral therapy. For the last 3 years, I've asked world-leading thinkers the same sorts of questions on my podcast, and last year I published a book with my research. I'm often reminded of the quote, "The human ability to create is so much faster than the human ability to adapt." We build faster planes, trains, rockets, and virtual worlds, and we spend such little time thinking how we're truly going to adapt to the wonderful things that we create. Human theory, human information theory suggests that we receive about 10 million pieces of information a second, and our conscious brain can only process 50. Were our brains built to send an email every 4 minutes, like most professionals do as a consequence of their work now? And so this is why it's a huge honor to be joined by my two panelists today, who are complete experts in the field, and I've met them over the course of the last 10 years in very different ways. Firstly, I'd love to introduce Marcus Weston. I met him at the age of 21, and he completely changed my life. He began his career in finance, and after a few years realized his mission lied elsewhere. He wasn't going to be crunching numbers, but he wanted to change the course of leaders' lives. He teaches some of the world's greatest brains, from heads of state, sports athletes, to CEOs. My second guest is the scientific writer Caroline Williams, whose new book, Move, is one of the best books I've read recently, and I wish that every single human could read this book. It has completely changed my behavior from a day-to-day basis, and Caroline has written for some of the world's leading publications, from the Times to the BBC to the Boston Globe. If you can say it, she's written for it. So I want to hand over to these two brilliant speakers who focused on human growth and hear their learnings. First of all, Caroline, how do you think leaders can thrive in the next 10 years?
Well, thank you for that intro. Thanks. Hi, everybody. I think it's a very interesting question, how we mentally thrive. And it's one that I've been looking at I've been a science journalist for about 20 years now. And my reason for doing what I do is to look at how we can get the best out of these amazing bits of kit that we've all got in our heads. You know, the human brain is the most complex object in the known universe, and we don't understand how it works. And anyone who tells you that they do is mistaken or just sort of lying. And the fascinating thing about it is trying to work out, through what we know now, how to reach our potential. So things, and also to work around the glitches that come as part of the package. So things like, you know, why can't we always focus when we want to? Why do creative ideas turn up when they feel like it and not necessarily when we need them for, you know, some kind of big meeting that's coming up? And also, how do we work around our propensity to not deal very well with stress, you know, depression, anxiety, all these things that come as part of the human package? How do we work around those? And for so long, the focus on how to deal with that has been from the neck up. And, you know, this idea that, you know, you can think your way out of anything. And I think we're missing something very important with that focus on the brain. And that is that we are animals who evolved to think and move at the same time. The whole point of a brain, it evolved in the first place to inform our movements in the world. So at the very basic level, you need to be able to move towards things that are rewarding, whether that's food or a partner or, you know, somewhere where the living is easier, and away from things that threaten us. And everything else that came after that, from emotions to rational thought, has sort of been bolted on to better inform those movements. And yet, here we are, sitting still, thinking, and that's the way we work. And, you know, the average adult spends 70% of their time sitting or lying completely still now, and that's 30% more than people in the 60s did. So partly because we've invented all these amazing technologies that make it entirely optional to move. We're the only creatures on the planet where we can get food, we can find a partner, we can entertain ourselves, we can do everything just by moving our thumbs. And that misses this sort of really crucial body-brain-mind connection. And it's starting to show. So research is starting to suggest that IQ at the population level and at the individual level is declining, creativity is suffering, mental health is suffering. And so I really feel like to mentally thrive, we need to reconsider the fact that we're moving animals, and we need to not sit and try and think. We need to get past the idea that commuting to offices, sitting in offices and sitting around business tables is the best way to think. It's not good for our thoughts, it's not good for our emotions. So I could go on about this all day, so I feel I should probably stop.
Well, so when I've opened her book to find out that we're getting more stupid because because we're not moving,
yeah.
I thought this was absolutely fascinating, because leaders are faced with the greatest challenge of how on earth do they motivate and increase productivity of a workforce. And so I think that your book has some of the greatest research and findings for how leaders can do this better. What are your thoughts on a practical perspective for how leaders not only can look after themselves, but also a community and a group of people?
Yeah, I think to a large extent, it has to come top down, because it's all very well, your team's reading my book and going, great, there's a great convincing research that links creativity to going for a quick walk for 20 minutes, and that increases our ability to generate ideas. Great, but if your boss is not okay with that, then that's not going to happen. And so it almost needs to be sort of actively encourage, right, guys, we've got a team meeting in half an hour. I don't want to see you at your desk. Everyone go out. And then come back, and because the research suggests that you have like a spillover of 20 minutes or so. So you go out for your walk, you start thinking creatively, you take your phone with you so you can kind of make notes as you go. It's where I do most of my work, is out on a walk. Come back, and then everybody's refreshed, the focus is refreshed, they're thinking creatively, and everyone's happier. So it's a win-win. You get better ideas and you get a happier workforce.
There was a couple of bits in your book where I think it's really interesting for everyone to hear about. Firstly, the research of moving together and how bonding that is, especially when teamwork is the dream work, as they say. But how on earth do we encourage teamwork?
I think this is the hardest bit to sell in a work environment, because there is this really great research that shows that when we move together in synchrony, it does something to our perception of where me begins and ends. So, we know where our body is in space because we know we can feel it and we can see it. When someone's moving in time with us, it sort of breaks down the barrier between me and you. And when this is done in experiments, people work together better afterwards. Everyone from children to, head of boards, we care about each other more. We feel more connected. And that's wonderful. I wouldn't want to say you all need to get up and dance together at work. This is possibly the hardest thing to make happen. But when you're doing team building away days, make that something where you all go do drumming together, or something that involves some kind of synchronous movement, because it does bond people together, especially if it's silly.
I was also fascinated about your research into movement addressing the anxiety and mental health crisis that we're in. Mm-hmm. Rates of unhappiness have never been so chronic. And what can movement and how can movement address that, especially when it comes to self-esteem and confidence?
Yes, so there is a really, really strong body of research. This isn't even sort of to be questioned, that increasing people's physical strength spills over into a sense of resilience, to greater self-esteem, confidence. This thing that psychologists call global self-efficacy, which is basically just a way of saying, I feel like I can handle life. And so there's been experiments, with teenage girls increasing their strength by 40% over 12 weeks. They started reporting that they felt able to stand up for themselves in difficult conversations, and especially with women in the workplace, we know that there's this gap where people don't feel that they can stand up and be present. And increasing physical strength, which doesn't, by the way, have to include physically bulking up. You don't need to be able to see it. just that internal sense of being stronger and more capable spills over into other areas of life. So that's really, really important. And it's one of the things easy to neglect as well.
And I just want to highlight the fact that you're not here telling everyone to get a gym membership.
No, I don't have any shares in gyms. This is all good. And in fact, the research shows that when you look at long-term brain health, so the health over the lifespan, people's cognitive decline is steeper, correlating with the amount of time they spend sedentary, regardless of whether they also do exercise. So the way we think of it at the moment, you go to work, you sit still, and then you go out at lunchtime, you go hell for leather, and then you go back and you sit again, and then you go home, and then you sit again. That doesn't offset the damage of all this sedentary time. So it's kind of about building in movement breaks, and that's another thing you can normalize. It's like, I've been sitting for a while, go and, do something, anything, walk up and down the stairs, go and get a coffee. Normalizing the fact that you don't always have to be present at your desk goes a long way. So yeah, little and often is the way, not necessarily spinning and running and weights.
I feel presentism is such a disease of office going, this idea of like, if I'm there, then I must be being productive, and as a consequence should be, put forward for a promotion or whatever. But lastly, before I move to talk to Marcus, what's the research saying about kind of long-term brain health when it comes to Alzheimer's and dementia? Because inevitably, we are moving into an aging population, and longevity is something that a topic that's becoming even more interesting and more important for all of us to know about.
Yeah, so I mean, our brains work on very much on a use it or lose it basis in the same way that our muscles do. And there is long-term research following large groups of people that show, the scariest statistic is that 13% of Alzheimer's cases can be traced to a sedentary lifestyle. So, which is not to say that anyone who has Alzheimer's has done it all wrong, because brain aging happens and disease happens, and there are many reasons for that. But if you want to protect your brain, the evidence suggests that from middle age onwards, at least, we need to be less sedentary, move around more. We don't all have to turn into gym bunnies, but just factor your body in when you want to think about your brain health.
So walking meetings feels like
meetings
a really practical way for leaders to thrive.
Yeah, and I think I saw a lot of it. I've been freelance for a long time, and often walk in the woods. And through lockdown and since then, you see a lot of people walking with their earphones in and chatting and walking. And I really hope that carries on, that it's seen as okay to be, oh yeah, I'm out in the woods, that you can hear birdsong, and just getting out. Walking meetings are definitely a thing, but again, that's something that you have to be senior enough to push for. You can't just suggest to your boss, let's go and walk and get a coffee together. So it kind of comes from the top, I think.
Marcus, I would love to hear your sharing and perspective on how you think leaders can thrive in the next 10 years.
So I would say, listening to Caroline, I might have to torture you by sitting down a bit longer. I apologize for that. I feel guilty now to speak. But I approach this from quite a complementary angle. And in my experience, how we'll thrive in the next 10 years especially is the very difficult quest of how to keep up internally with all of the extraordinary and extreme changes that will happen externally. That's a very difficult quest. How is each of us going to keep up internally? In other words, life is going to take all of us from 0 to 100. Whatever we think we're at now, we're going to be multiplying. How do you keep up with that internally? How do you keep up with that internally? And I think most people default to change as external. They think if something has changed externally, they feel change internally. So you have a new relationship, you feel new. Or a new job, you feel new. Yet Groundhog Days seem to live where bosses and relationships follow us into repetitive cycles. So there has to be some new way of looking at change, not externally, not outward bound, not environmentally, but internally. And for that, we teach a kind of default, which is called CPR, right? CPR. CPR is not cardiopulmonary resuscitation, although it does actually resuscitate, I think, your success and your mental health in the same way. but it's really around the idea of CPR meaning consciousness, performance, and results. And let me explain that briefly. Because companies can't change, right? Politicians, countries can't change. They sell change. They try and change manage, but they can't change. The only thing that changes is people. And what most people are naive to is the mechanics that goes on in our brains and minds and souls regarding true change. Because when you get that right, when you somehow link a very strategic intervention externally into a change management process, married to a tactical self-discovery of sorts, because they are the mindsets that are pervading and executing the change that you wish for anyway, then magic happens, right? Then magic happens. Then in terms of physical success, in terms of mental engagement, and so on. So what's CPR? CPR, very quickly, is consciousness, performance, and results. Now, there are two bridges to discuss. One is, what is the bridge between conscious and performance? And the second is performance to results. We'll do the latter first, it's easier. The bridge from performance to results is really important, primarily because one of the things that we're seeing across the board globally these days, I mean globally in terms of multi-sector, multi-continent, is the cause. What's the cause of entitlement issues, disengagement issues, sadness, depression issues? And this sounds controversial, so please wait till I explain this before you judge me. But from what we see, our research clearly marks the cause of those mental health issues, not empirically, but primarily as laziness. We're finding mass endemic laziness across multiple sectors of companies and societies. I don't know if it's an endemic thing pre-COVID, certainly COVID triggered it, but it's an issue. Now, the easy solution to that is this. If you can give people their own cause and effect. So we teach people cause and effect, meaning what? Means no more coincidence in life. You can't be victim any longer in life. You can't, I mean you can be, but I'm saying in terms of the desire to be successful, you mustn't be. Because if you understand that your head and your brain and your mind and your actions and your words are planting seeds that create and contribute majorly towards your success, if you can chart that your 1 unit of output creates 5 units of rewards, and you can show that, if you can show a person their cause and effect, then people typically, we found, love to work harder. People love to work harder. If they can see the obvious reward of their effort, people are loving to work harder. But because they can't see that cause and effect, so too endemic laziness lives. Now, the quick bridge as well between consciousness and performance gets into what is really going on inside our heads. Because every one of our success, mental, physical destinies, it roots back to how we think. Our desires are giving us thoughts. Our research shows that thoughts are not thoughts that we think. Thoughts are thoughts that we're given. In other words, like a radio doesn't have a musician in it. It's just an amplifier of a signal that lives around it, right? The music doesn't originate in the radio, so too thoughts don't originate in our brains. Actually, there are positive and negative frequencies around us that some people can key into easier. Some people are just pessimistic. Some people are just optimistic, not based on evidence, often just based on what they're keying into. And you can train that. It's a muscle. It's a consciousness muscle. You can train positivity. We see it day in, day out. So if you understand the desires lead to the thoughts that we have, lead to the feelings that we have about those thoughts that we're given, which trigger actions and words, which then create the habits that we form, which then define the characters we have, which then have destinies, changeable destinies. You can create a change in consciousness to change performance, to change results. And the last point, just quickly, is that the reason why we think that's so imperative in the next 10 years is, again, the research we've stacked. goes twofold. The next 0 to 2 years, we find, is going to be humongous change in just social fabric, in that there are extremes and polarizing extremes of social fabrics, individual thought cultures that will slowly elect leaders to represent their extremity, which causes a greater chaos from 2 years onwards. And that 2-year to 10-year onward, I think incredible political change, incredible economic change, financial change, the monetary system. I sound perhaps too extreme. I know England is quite a balanced country, but I mean this without holding back. I think the systems that have provided for us, certainly post-war, those very traditional monetary power systems are going to dismantle. They will dismantle. I think the power structures will change, royal structures will change. Everything that we thought was a stalwart of authority, I think will default into the power of people. And that is very scary considering the consciousness of people, but it's very exciting considering the changes that you can imbue into the consciousness of people if you get it right. So probably that's enough for now.
Wow, that was unbelievable, and so many thoughts, and I'm sure everyone here can relate this personally to what your cause and effect in your own life is playing out at this moment in time. What seeds have you put into your own life that you're seeing the effect of, which is very interesting. Marcus, you get called up by people on all different time zones, sometimes at 3 a.m. to 5 a.m. to 12 in the morning. And often when people are in crisis because they really don't know where else to turn to, and they're often, as I said, leaders with tremendous responsibility. What do you think are the greatest mistakes leaders make?
Well, I'll answer twofold. I think the biggest issue behind the greatest mistakes that leaders make defaults to one thing. There's a question that the greatest threat to global leadership, and by the way, in some level, all of us are global leaders. You haven't got to be a president or a prime minister to be a leader. In fact, very often those hands are tied much more than we are to affect change in life, unquestionably. So each one of us needs to see ourselves as a leader, evidenced not least by the fact that there's not that many, and forgive me if you're in the audience, there's not that many global leaders these days who one would look to for tremendous example. I'm still hunting. But that said, I think the greatest threat to leadership in general is singular. And it's my favorite word in the entire English vocabulary, and it's one that I've researched for the last 25 years, possibly obsessively, and it's the ego. The ego. That word is what took me out of investment banking and threw me around the world to research down every spiritual path and conscious mastery and conscious masters around the world to really research the origin and depth of what is the human psyche and ego. From what I can gather, and I might be wrong because there's still hopefully much to go, the deepest and the oldest research on the ego comes from a very ancient pathway called Kabbalah, which is a little bit misunderstood these days perhaps, but it's a 4,000-year-old conscious mastery pathway which explains the ego in a way which is very different to the more common psychoanalytic construct which perhaps most of us are more aware of. So the ego. Now, one of the egos that I do see very often, back to your question perhaps more directly, is authenticity. I think as the world speeds up, which it unquestionably is, truth is exposed. And I think truth, which we've seen perhaps in the papers recently, right, in the US and the UK papers of leaders saying lockdown, and then all of a sudden, I party, but you can't. And that happens in the States, by the way, not just here, everywhere. But I think authenticity means that leaders who think they have positions will lose their positions as quickly as they've been given their positions, based on the fact that leaders will not be followed. You see, leaders need followers. Followers need consciousness. And consciousness needs authenticity and truth. And I think when leaders are more humble and transparent and authentic, if they live by their words, if their word is their bond, if they do what they speak, if they act in ways that they believe in, if they live a life of honor, if they live truly, I think authenticity then becomes a tremendously attractive leadership virtue, which I see lacking a lot in a lot of the structures, certainly that call me these days. Thank you.
Really, really interesting reflections to take into our own lives. And I'd love to open it up to questions. If anybody has a question about how leaders can thrive in the next 10 years or anything that's been mentioned. Yes.
I am telling them what, or asking them why.
Do you mind repeating your question? Sorry.
Yeah. So the question is, I see this a lot, ego. How do you help leaders get over this? Because very, very often they just don't want to hear what's in front of them and is going to kill them. Be it transformation, whatever the topic, it's in front of them and they just don't hear it because...
Yeah, I agree. You know, you sit down with someone, you say, listen, you know, the first thing I will talk to you about is your disgusting anger issue and the way you treat others. And by the way, you're really resented in life. And, you know, I think most people will say, find me someone else. What's interesting to me about how the Kabbalah presents the ego is it's not this mental negative construct. It's your best friend. It's actually your success guarantor. Because when you can identify what within you to change, you have built a greater fortress to your success. And what you do is you sell people on their success, not on their ego. And people buy into that cause and effect whereby they're willing to make some effort if you can show them, certainly as a coach, the greater reward. Right? If I say to you, your services will cost me £1,000 an hour, then my first default is, well, I don't think so. But if you guarantee me £10,000, then I'll be silly not to. Right? So the reward, the transformation of their ego will create financially, spiritually, in every sense, a reward that everyone finds attractive. Yeah, that makes sense.
Right.
Yeah, but there are mechanics to it. That's the headline. Yeah.
Hi. Can I ask, how do you think the younger generation should be trained to be good leaders in the future? Because obviously they're very different to us. The teenagers, the schools and the universities of today are very different from when we were younger.
Great question. Caroline, do you want to take that first?
I mean, I'm a movement ball, obviously, but also a brain ball. And I think we need to teach them how to feel their emotions in their bodies, because there's a real thing, people are disconnected, we're all up in our heads, and if you can't feel in your body how something is, then it's very difficult to take action to change it. And that can be really simply done in schools. There's studies with very young children where they teach them, you know, can you imagine you're a snail? Can you breathe into the shell of the snail? Can you feel what that feels like? Can you imagine being an elephant and holding everything in and then letting it all out? And there's been studies that suggest that translates into better sort of social interactions between them, and things like focus and grades, you know, all these measurable things seem to improve. So I think we need to get children young, get them hooked back into their bodies, because with the best will in the world, they're not doing the running around and climbing trees and doing stuff that maybe we did when we were kids and falling off their bikes. So it needs to sort of be put back into their lives. I think there's a real opportunity to do that. And then by the time they get into the workforce, they're going to not tolerate this crazy lifestyle that we have of, you know, sitting on a train, sitting in an office, sitting on the way home and wondering why we feel like crap and we can't get anything done. So I think, you know, we almost need to entirely change the way we think about thinking and emotions and start them early.
In your book, you've got some great research about the mile run, a headmaster.
The Daily Mile.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there was a headmistress at a school in Scotland, and she actually started it because she noticed that the children were really unfit, and it was a physical health thing. They were putting on weight, they were unfit. And so it's a woman called Elaine Wiley, and she decided that she was going to have this time in the day where kids will just throw down their pencils. The teacher could decide when it was, so when they were looking bored or restless or just not listening. And we're going to go outside, we're not going to get changed, we're just going to run around the playground for 15 minutes. You can go whatever speed you like, you can make as much noise as you like, and then you go back and we carry on. And lots of schools have taken this up. The kids love it. I talked at a festival in the summer, and this little girl at the front was going, me, and she was like, I do this and I love it. They absolutely love it. But there's been studies done of the thousands and thousands of children that this is now spread to, and their focus has improved, their behaviours improved, their grades have improved, they're happier, they're fitter, everything is a win-win-win. So, we can do this in children. I would love to see that happening for the adults as well. But if we get them started early, then they make that connection themselves between movement and thinking and feeling, and hopefully that will carry on.
Amazing. Marcus, how do you think we can look after our children better?
So it's a really important question. Not because of the PR, it's good to talk about kids. I think if we get consciousness right in business leadership, and you get consciousness right in primary school education as a backup, the failing business leadership, you change the world. I really, really do think you change the world. Certainly next generation. The way I relate to what you say is through my son. And the answer I'll give you is not necessarily the textbook answer that you should replicate. I quote no liability for what I'm about to tell you, but it's the way I believe. So we just relocated from New York, and in the States, the teacher called us and said, your son is lively, which we kind of knew. And they said he's been, he's ADD, he's this, he's hyperactive, he's, everything that they can throw at us. And on the phone conversation, my wife was very concerned. And so she was, I'm so sorry, almost apologetic, and what can we do, and what should we do, and how would you suggest we treat this? And there were all sorts of treatments, therapy, and perhaps even, chemicals. And so the teacher said, Marcus, you're very quiet. So I said, I couldn't be happier, actually. So she goes, I just told you your son has a few issues. I said, I couldn't be happier. I said, instead of taking your chemical suggestion, I'll put the phone down, thank you very much, and I'll be partying tonight. Why? Because I think the world is going to get so immensely challenging unless the kids we're bringing up have edge to them, real edge to them. Unless they're disruptive, they may well suffer from being conformists. And that scares the living daylights out of me. And the fact that he is hyperactive, utterly undisciplined, and arguably wild, truly excites me. And it's on me. It's not on you. You haven't got to feel, I'll have to deal with that. And so my job is to train his insides, right? My job is to train his insides so he has a spiritual, a conscious regiment to fall back on, where in his physical desire to receive and change the world and do crazy things, he will have the insides to be conscious, to be humane, to be dignified, to be caring, to be sharing, to be unifying, but in a way that is beyond the normal frame of thinking. And I think we're not bringing up our kids in the right way. We're making them regurgitate stupid school, draconian, academic, useless. Should I go on? Right? Which anyway you can do on your Samsung phone in 10 seconds. You don't need to be there anymore. We've got to think different, and we've got to build our kids with these conscious spiritual edges where they can have a humongous desire to receive, to change the world, but then the insides to be able to control that and direct that in possibly sensible ways.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry to be controversial. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Really fast decisions, and they make really fast decisions often on insufficient data. They don't have the time to do the research, which means they're under stress, almost like gamblers, to pull the decision out of a hat. Now, there's a great book, by the way, if you haven't read it, Stolen Focus by Johan Hari. It's filled with research about where we are all becoming ADHD. My concern with both your children, my children, the world's children, is that by over-shortening complexity and forcing people to make decisions, we are inevitably going to fall into a more adversarial world, poorer decisions, driven by emotion rather than logic. And Brexit and Trump and the other things which are constantly waved at us in this regard will be nothing when people are pushing nuclear buttons. How do we stop this gross simplification and the shortening of decision cycles?
Interesting question.
Yeah, I mean, so I have a 12-year-old son who is just going into the joys of social media and TikTok and everything like that. And I do see this, constant making a decision. Well, that's bad and that's good and this is that. And I worry about it. But on the other hand, I think this next generation, they're going to get savvy quite quickly. Because when I say to him, why do you think that? He can then step back and see the wider picture. And I think they know a lot earlier than we did. When I was 12, I wasn't thinking about, what Russia was doing and World War III and all this kind of thing. But I do agree with you that going deeper is an issue, and that our school system is all about regurgitating and not necessarily getting people and saying, be creative, go out there and kind of go deep and see what you can learn. I wish I had an answer to it. I don't know. Maybe Marcus has got the answer.
Well, I mean, I don't kind of have an answer. I have an opinion, and I agree with you. Depth. I think depth is the opinion I have, and I mean by that this. I give you an example. So we teach not just in businesses, in governments, but also in schools. And one of the games you run in schools are games, because you can't teach classroom theories to kids. You teach games. So one of the games we teach is this: you put a bunch of kids into a kind of field, and you give them 20 footballs and a goal that's maybe 5 feet away from where they are. And you ask the kids who wants to score a goal, and all the kids say me. And so you say go for it. So you line up the footballs, and every kid just knocks the ball into the goal. It's next to their feet almost, and everyone scores. And after 15 or so balls, the kid who's scoring the goals looks quite dejected. And so you ask, what's going on? Why are you upset? And they say, well, it's quite boring, actually. So you say, well, how can we help that? What should we do to make it less boring? I want a goalkeeper, right? So, okay, kid who wants to be a goalkeeper, right? One of them goes and goals. Kid shoots, misses. Kid shoots, misses, kid scores, elated. And we ask the question, what was your joy in your elation that you're celebrating having just scored? Well, I scored a goal. No. You scored a goal 2 minutes ago, and you weren't elated. In fact, you were dejected. What's your elation due to? The goalkeeper? Exactly. The fact that the goalkeeper existed to threaten your ability not to score a goal gives you the ability to become the cause of scoring goals. Meaning, what's happiness? Happiness is the effect of becoming the cause of something greater in your life. Now, if you start seeing every challenge in your life as just a goalkeeper that you've chosen to give you some springboard and elevation towards that elation which you can create and you can achieve in your life, then what you do is you build depth. Into that depth, when those short, demanding decisions need you instantaneously to think of something to represent the masses or long-term business future, you'll have the insides to make far better decision-making from than the gamble that I agree mostly happens in business boardrooms. It's a gamble. I don't think we have depth. I think you can build depth. I know you can build depth, but I don't think we do that very well.
I think also teaching people to go inside and know what that means and what your values are then gives you something you can draw on quickly.
Yes.
Because if you're constantly reacting to stuff, and this is, for children as well, they're on, they're making decisions that are going to live online forever.
Yeah.
And, in the boardroom, you're making decisions that affect a lot of people.
Yeah.
But if you can just take a moment and you know yourself on the inside, then that's a good grounded place to go from.
It's also tricky because they just don't care, right? That's the biggest issue, by the way. Lack of desire, lack of care, the biggest issue. You can build that, but it's a tricky one.
They need to dance together. Then
we need to dance together. Sadly, we've got time for one last question, and you, sir, with the microphone.
Hi. So you both mentioned this changing paradigm, this shifting paradigm. Marcus more so the consciousness shift and the economic shift, and yourself maybe for like the office culture, for example, going for walking meetings. One of the biggest sort of paradigm shift potentials that I see out there at the moment is sort of decentralized infrastructure, in particular Web3, crypto that comes with this. Have you guys considered decentralized organizational structures and how that is going to be, in my opinion, a key part of this paradigm shift, in particular with leadership roles, and how that's going to affect motivation and something like, can I go for a walk on my meeting?
The dream I have, and I believe in strong morning regiments that look after mind, body, and soul. Your day changes, no question, as a result. Much research about that. One of the goals I have is that I'm no longer wanted nor needed in life. Meaning, the fact that a conference or a company or a leader of sorts calls me means they haven't got that structure or toolkit themselves. My wish is, it's free, it's obvious, it's out there, it's just obvious, right? It's obvious to people. So the success of me is not based on anything material. It's based on, am I unfortunately still employed? That is the most decentralized wish I could wish for. The fact that wisdom, that kids grow up and they just know. They know it's inside of them, because wisdom exists long before books and speakers come out and reveal something sometimes novel. Wisdom exists. We have to tap into that, right? That's the ultimate form of decentralization. And I agree that even DAOs and Web3 will be nothing. Child's play compared to what's coming. Yeah.
From my point of view, I feel like what we've just been through as a society has been hideous, but also a gift in that it's become very clear that things can be done when we are not necessarily all doing the same thing in the same place at the same time. On the other hand, it's also taught us how much we need each other and how much connecting in the same room means to us. And so I think where we need to go is some degree of flexibility. And I don't know how to make that happen whilst also, but we know that it can be done when everybody's out. So there must be a happy medium where we can work together and, put our heads together in a room or virtually, and things get done and people live more fulfilling lives and we can go forward from there. And I really hope it doesn't flip back to where we've been, because I'm hoping we've learned something from the last couple of years.
Well, thank you both so much for this insightful and deeply thought-provoking talk today. Where's the best place for people to ask further questions and reach and explore some of your work?
Well, I have a website, carolinewilliams.net. I'm on Instagram
You are Caroline Williams Science.
Caroline Williams _science, and Twitter @ScienceCaroline. And I have a cracking book called Move, the New Science of Body
Honestly,
Overmind.
it's so good. You should buy it for all of your teams. It's so brilliant. I finished it within a day. Marcus, where's the best place to find you?
Instagram, I am Marcus Weston. 2 websites. One, a business mastery called consciousnessatwork.org. The self-mastery Kabbalah.com. And LinkedIn, Marcus Weston, I'm guessing.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.